Well, welcome to another episode of Christ in Culture. My name is Jeff Short. This is Mel McGinnis. And today we're going to be broadcasting from the Chautauqua Institution. That's in the background right there. If you see it right here, the building is the amphitheater. And we're going to be having a discussion here at the Presbyterian House on the third floor. So if you hear some background noise, that's people after the chapel service in the morning. Thank you, Mel, for being with me in this discussion. We've got some big things to talk about, and the new option possibility that we're talking about today is the opening up of a Supreme Court position by the retirement of Justice Kennedy. So this is quite a shock, isn't it?
It really is, although there was anticipation of Justice Kennedy stepping down. Even as Trump took office, his name would come up as far as him not serving out Trump's term.
Was his name coming up before, like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's name, though? I mean, there are a couple of justices, I think Souter and Ginsburg, who are in their 80s, are they? Or almost 80?
Yeah, although Souter's off the court now.
I mean, not Souter, but who's the other...
I don't know if it's Breyer, but I don't think Breyer's quite that old. But I know Kagan and Sotomayor are very.
No, there's Ginsburg and there's another.
You've got Ginsburg, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Justice Breyer.
Now, Breyer, how old is Breyer?
I'm going to say he's in his 70s.
He's in his 70s, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in her 80s, right?
Yes,
okay,
right.
So I was thinking that before Kennedy would retire, Ruth Bader Ginsburg would. But she's hanging on, I think, because she is clearly not wanting any kind of conservative to replace her.
Right, and I think Ginsburg, recognizing what's going on, she'll serve until she dies, whereas Kennedy didn't have that kind of mindset.
Yes. So this is a shock. This is quite a shock that he, all of a sudden, right now, before the midterm elections, decides to retire. Now, a lot of Christians are very excited. I'm hopefully optimistic, as they might say, and I'm sure you're optimistic that we might finally get an opportunity to reverse Roe v. Wade. What have you been hearing from commentaries, Christian commentaries or conservative commentaries, about the possibility of that coming about?
Yeah, I think it would be dealt with on the term of the federal level, meaning those who are constitutional judges would recognize that such a decision as Roe v. Wade ought to be at the state level, meaning the justices cannot usurp the prerogatives of the state to administer abortion laws as they see fit. Unlike those justices in Roe v. Wade saying, no, you can't have that law. Right. They usurped authority that wasn't there and imposed their personal opinion on the matter.
Yeah. It's one of the greatest examples of that, legislating from the bench, crafting law from the bench, which is a no-no. Strictly, our Constitution wants judges to basically make decisions as to whether a law already is or isn't, but not crafting law, not tailoring law from the bench, and that's what Roe v. Wade did. Now, what we have to realize, and what Christians have to realize, that even if everything happens the way we would pray and hope and pray, and Roe is reversed, that would not end abortion in our country.
No.
Abortion perhaps would be curtailed maybe 10% or maybe 15% overall, statistically, year after year, if Roe v. Wade were overturned. But what that means is it would go back to the states, and that abortion would continue on as normal in some of these states, most of these states, which is sad, because to think that you can reverse a monumental decision like Roe v. Wade and still not end abortion, but that's the reality, right? Even if the best case scenario, it's still not going to end.
Right. the Constitution doesn't speak directly to abortion, although I would say the right to life is in Amendment 5 of the Constitution, so there is a case for that. And when you look at the Declaration of Independence as well, you see that element of the right to life, which emerges from that very important document which founded our country. And those kinds of principles are there, but I think historically speaking, it was a matter that the states dealt with. So they could do whatever they wanted. They could outlaw any and all abortions. And then other states, like in our time frame, New York, Governor Cuomo would continue to push the expansion of abortion. I think what this
and they would be recruiting from other states. Women would be traveling to New York to have abortions.
I think you would see that happening. But then you'll also see state legislatures in other places enact legislation dealing with the heartbeat, or dealing with pain, or dealing with other regulatory matters that will help curtail and limit abortion.
Yeah, and definitely some states would just outright ban it.
I think so, yeah.
You might have 10, 15 states that would actually say it's not going to happen on our borders.
Yeah.
And that would be a blessing, because then you could actually go and live in a state, abortion-free state. And from my perspective, from my prayers and my reflecting on abortion, one of the big threats that we all have over our heads right now is that this nation could receive the wrath of God upon it for the sin of abortion. And it was covering the entire nation. I mean, every place was eligible for the wrath of God over the sin of abortion, because it was legal in all 50 states. But now, if we can see Roe v. Wade reversed in the next, and Jeffrey Toobin of CNN says maybe the next 18 months it would be reversed, then there would be pockets of places in the United States, states would be abortion-free. And I think that would be a fantastic situation where you could actually say, I live in a state that doesn't have abortion, that doesn't support abortion. And I think those people in those blessed states would have a little bit more security in knowing that the wrath of God, the judgment of God, might not fall right on their state, at least for that sin.
Yeah, and what people need to realize that these appointments really matter. People just can't dismiss this as something that needs to be done as a formality. What we need to understand is this appointment is crucial in so many respects.
It really is, and it's really important to get it right.
Yep.
If you recall back, what was it, 30 years ago? Was it 30 years ago when President Reagan nominated Robert Bork? Remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that very well.
I happened to be in Washington, D.C. I was sort of interning at a pro-life organization, the Christian Action Council, and I actually got to sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings of this committee meeting, the Judiciary Committee. And Robert Bork was a professor. He's deceased now, but he was a professor, and he loved to lecture and he loved to talk about law. And so when he was called into the Judiciary Committee after he was selected by Ronald Reagan, he wanted to have a nice, stimulating talk about law. So the senators would ask him, Ted Kennedy would ask him a question of legal procedure, and he would spend 5-10 minutes talking about that. He loved it. And then some other senator, and he didn't realize that these senators were not just listening to him to see what he was thinking. They were looking for ammunition to derail him, because what he was telling was not what they wanted to hear. Right.
And what they did was use his own words against him when Judge Bork was true and faithful to the text of the Constitution, the way law ought to be understood. But these senators were out to get him because they really didn't believe in what the Constitution articulates and how the Constitution restricts government.
And they didn't want anything changed with abortion.
Right.
They didn't want anything changed with Roe v. Wade.
Right.
And it didn't matter what the Constitution said. See, this constitutional lawyer, Robert Bork, he was expounding on the principles of interpretation, and he was going it like he was in a lecture in a classroom. And I loved it. I loved to hear him talk about the law because it was interesting, it was stimulating, and I think most of the American people loved it. But the people who wanted Roe v. Wade to stay the same, abortion as normal, they hated it because it meant a revolution, and so they derailed him, or what we now know as borked him.
Yeah.
And so what Ben Shapiro, the Jewish commentator, was saying is that this time we have to make sure we get it right.
Exactly.
And we don't let any political pressures or any kind of manipulations come in the way of getting across these appointments, because if we blow it now and there's another stealth pro-abortion Supreme Court, it's over.
Yeah. I mean, if we get a Sandra Day O'Connor, if we get a David Souter, this will be very ruinous.
Yeah, explain in those situations. The strategy, of course, has been that Christians and conservatives and pro-life people have been praying and trying their best for the last 3 decades to try to get pro-life Supreme Court judges on the court to overturn Roe v. Wade, to end abortion, and that's been the plan. Now, so Ronald Reagan ran on a pro-life ticket. He was pro-life, but explain what happened to his appointments.
Yeah, with Sandra Day O'Connor, when she was selected, to me and others, she was an unknown factor. It almost seemed like getting a woman on the court mattered more than getting a principled constitutionalist on the court. Mm-hmm. And when those decisions about pro-life matters surfaced, she would vote against what the president articulated.
I don't know what that was.
I have no idea what that was, but we're still here.
Wow. You never know what you're going to hear over here. But as you were saying, you might call these were traitor Supreme Court justices. Yep. They understood why they were appointed because of their understanding of the Constitution and the strict constructionist philosophy, where you only read what the text reads, you only get meaning from what the words of the text mean, and you stick to the text and you don't get creative and try to read into the text and all this other stuff, right?
Or put your opinion into it.
Yeah.
Make your opinion become the law. Make your opinion supersede what's there.
And there's an objective standard in the text, and you have to follow those rules. You can't get creative like Roe v. Wade was. Roe v. Wade was such an act of creative writing that it is impossible to find what they found in the Constitution, because it's not there. It was invention. So Ronald Reagan appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, thinking that that's what she was. And she turned 180 on him and totally betrayed the pro-life cause and everything else. Okay, so he got burned on that. Now, I don't know if you know the backstory on that. Jerry Falwell and some of the other Christian voices at the time, the moral majority, they didn't know anything about her, Sandra Day O'Connor. And they were wondering, wait a minute, we don't know anything about her, we can't vouch for her, we're leaning on protesting this pick because we're not going to support her if we don't know that she's pro-life. Ronald Reagan, supposedly, this is the story, called Jerry Falwell and said, I know things that you don't know about her. You're going to be pleased with this selection. Give me your trust on this, and I promise you won't be disappointed. And so Jerry Falwell and other pro-family Christian leaders trusted Ronald Reagan on Sandra Day O'Connor, and it didn't work. It didn't work. She turned out to be exactly our worst fears. And so we need to make sure that we don't get burned again.
Yeah.
And I hope Jerry Falwell Jr., who's one of Trump's biggest supporters, doesn't just simply say, Mr. Trump, whatever you want, that's great. I hope he does give feedback. If there's someone that Trump puts forward, I hope that he doesn't just cave in and say, oh yeah, whatever you want.
Right. He has put out a list, that is President Trump, of potential nominees.
Yeah.
I don't know that list. I mean, I've heard people talk about them, from Ted Cruz, Jay Sekulow. The one that I do have a little suspicion about is Thomas Hardiman. That's the one where I'm very iffy on him because I've heard he's a cross between Kennedy and Roberts. We don't need individuals like them.
No.
We need people like Mike Lee. Mike Lee, of course, is a senator now from Utah.
Yeah.
You know where he stands.
Yeah.
You know exactly what he's about. And that would be a very safe pick. I would be confident in somebody like that. The only problem is that would take him out of the U.S. Senate, and he's such a fantastic U.S. senator.
And then, as Ben Shapiro said, yeah, but who do you really think Utah's going to send a liberal to replace him?
Right, no.
So they're going to get another conservative.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. There is a list now, and we have to make sure that, and Ben Shapiro was commenting on this whole situation, the Jewish commentator who is the president of the Daily Wire, it's an internet network, and he was saying, okay, we don't want to make the same mistake as Sandra Day O'Connor, we don't want to make the same mistake as Reagan did with Kennedy.
Yes, right, that was a mistake.
Kennedy, again, was a Reagan appointee.
Mm-hmm.
So here our great conservative hero, Ronald Reagan, appoints 2 pro-abortion justices. Mm-hmm. Exactly what he was not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we got burned, we got conned, we got tricked, we got deceived.
And we also got
bamboozled.
Right, we got the same thing happened with George Bush.
W. Bush.
Yeah, when he selected David Souter. That was a stab in the back to those who are of the pro-life constitutionalist sentiment.
Yeah, so we've been burned again and again by our own presidents who we supported, who ran on a pro-life ticket, who we said, great, pro-life ticket, we'll support the pro-life president. And the pro-life president appoints pro-abortion judges. Okay, we got burned. So this is really discouraging. Now, Ben Shapiro's strategy is this. Okay, forget about trying to be tippy-toe around abortion. You have a majority in the Congress. You have a president. You don't need the Democrats. You have the nuclear option. You don't need 60% now. You only need 50%. Mitch McConnell did away with the 60% requirement. I think before, when Reagan and Bush and all of our other past presidents, they were operating under, you needed to get 60 votes, right?
Yep.
60% of the votes.
Exactly.
We don't have to do that anymore.
Don't have to.
We only have to get a majority.
Right.
And so Ben Shapiro says, look, just have your guy, the guy that you choose, come in, lay all the cards on the table. What do you think of Roe v. Wade? Tell us about what's wrong with it. Let him say everything he wants to say. Let the Democrats have a heart attack and then vote the guy in. You don't need the Democrats. That's Ben Shapiro's strategy. I don't think they're going to do that.
Although, too, there are 2 Republicans that could be very iffy. Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska.
Yeah.
That could gum up the works right there. However, in saying that, there could also be some red state Democrat senators who would vote for the nominee that Trump puts on the table.
Because of the midterm elections.
Because of the midterm elections.
Yeah, so there are different things. One of the questions I had, one of the candidates on the list of Trump's Supreme Court possibilities was a law professor from Notre Dame, a woman.
Was it Barrett?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really good, solid, pro-life, looks great. But my question is, if she were appointed and chosen and passed, could she hold up under the pressure of everyone on the left hating her guts if she were to be the one who reversed Roe v. Wade with that swing vote.
And she would be hated.
She would be hated, vilified. We already saw what they did with Susan Huckabee.
Yeah.
Kicked out of a restaurant. We're seeing this nastiness, uncivility. Could this Supreme Court lady, if she was put on the court, actually stand up to the pressure? And could she deal with the pressure that would be coming from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, these other women, basically calling her a traitor to the women's cause? I mean, there's a lot of pressure on that Supreme Court. That's why some of these people flipped. I think Sandra Day O'Connor and Kennedy and some of these others, they changed because of the pressure, right?
Yeah, I mean, that could be the case. And John Roberts switched with Obamacare. He was out of his head when he was going to vote against it. And from what I understand, a couple days before, he switched his vote and decided to be for it.
I mean, we don't know the pressure that these guys have to go through. There's just tremendous social pressure,
right?
Psychological pressure, career pressure, Oh, it's just physical threats. I mean, we don't know what goes on. We don't know what kind of threats of violence these Supreme Court justices get on a routine basis.
Right. I mean, if this woman you mentioned from Notre Dame is like a Scalia, we have no fears, because Scalia was so articulate. He was so principled. What a spine and backbone that guy had, and he was a well-versed, well-spoken person. If that woman from Notre Dame is like that, wow, that'd be tremendous. But still, to me, she's an unknown factor.
It would still take a lot of strength that she would have to exhibit to stand up to the pressure. She would have to have a very strong constitution to be able to withstand the pressure she would get from women, the feminist movement, the far left. More so than a man would get. And so, that's a factor. But Ben Shapiro's strategy, have them come in, have them explain everything, be very clear. The reason being, we can't make a mistake on this. We cannot have a stealth candidate again. We can't have another Kennedy. We can't have another Sandra Day O'Connor.
We can't. It goes way back to Nixon. I mean, Nixon put people in the court that certainly did not reflect constitutionalist principles.
But it never goes the other way.
It never goes the other way.
Like a liberal president never appoints a stealth conservative.
Right.
Oh, he turned out conservative.
No.
Really? That never happens.
Yeah. Gerald Ford appointed Stevens, and he was a total waste when it came to applying the Constitution as it was written.
Yeah. So it's really something that we have to pray a lot about as Christians. We need to really pray that this process would move forward, and that our president would be able to actually appoint someone that he promised he would appoint, and that looks like Gorsuch was a faithful promise appointee.
Yeah, jury's still out.
So far, we really don't know. I mean, we do know that I think he's Episcopalian.
Yeah.
And really ultra-liberal denomination.
Yeah, I know. And with the woman from Notre Dame, I wouldn't call that a conservative college.
Not necessarily, no.
So you don't know what you're going to get.
So we're crossing our fingers with Gorsuch. So far, he kind of looks okay, looks good, but there's so much that can happen in the process that nothing is guaranteed. So we need to be cautiously optimistic, but not get too carried away.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things can happen.
And I think we better understand the terms of the debate that's going to be occurring in the press and amongst politicians. Yeah. In other words, they're going to try to frame this debate as we need a progressive judge rather than a right-winger. And when you think of the American public, what sounds better, progressive or right-winger? What people need to understand, it's not about that.
No.
It's about being a constitutionalist or a statist, because it's the progressives that use that term progressive to try to advance an agenda of statism.
Right.
And statism doesn't sound as good as progressivism, so they'll use that term to make the court be a legislative branch rather than a judicial branch. They'll try to make the court be like what Mark Levin calls the Politburo, meaning the policy maker for the country. And that policy would be centralization of government.
Right.
And the Supreme Court would not be independent,
right,
as it would have a superior role
right,
over the lawmaking body
right,
of our federal government, the Congress.
You're right on the issue of language. We have to be very careful
Yeah.
with the way we use words and the way we allow people to use words. Because I just heard a Washington Post journalist did a little podcast, and she was saying, well, what we need to do is be careful to select a judge just like Kennedy, because she said Kennedy was actually a conservative, she was trying to say, and who actually did have more of a centrist opinion, and sometimes he would go to the right or sometimes he would go to the left, but we need another one in his mold. And I'm thinking, no, we don't need another one in his mold. We need someone who is more looking at the Constitution and wants to interpret the Constitution.
Yeah.
And not create law or create social policy from the bench.
Yeah.
So we're going to see the clash of two competing philosophies.
Right. And Kennedy was a Jekyll and Hyde judge.
Right.
One time he'd be Jekyll, another time he'd be Hyde.
Right.
On the one hand, like these last Supreme Court decisions that came out, he was very good.
Right.
But on the other hand, he's been involved in redefining marriage.
Yes.
And using the Supreme Court as a Politburo, as a legislative
Yeah.
branch, as to impose things
Yeah.
that ought not to have been, that the government at the federal level has no authority
Yeah,
to
and you
do
notice,
so.
and you notice that he does sometimes side with the conservatives, but on all the really important issues, the monumental, earth-shaking issues, he sides with the liberals. He
Right.
sides with the progressives. He sided with them on abortion, clearly, and he
Yep.
sided with them on gay marriage. I
Yep.
mean, all the important things. Now, he may do some other things that we like, but hey, overall disaster,
Right.
total disaster. Well,
Right.
Well, let's end our first segment here, and we'll come back and do another segment. But appreciate your feedback, Mel, and we thank you for watching, and tune in next week on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.